it's Katie with S&B, and today we're going to install our open air intake kit on the 2017 to 2019 Ford Powerstroke 6.7. So let's get started. Before you get started, disconnect the negative terminal on both batteries and the positive just on the passenger side. Next, remove the battery hold down bracket and set aside the hardware because you're going to use it later. Once you get that bracket off, you can then remove the battery from the vehicle. Just make sure you keep it level. Pull out the red locking tab and remove the mass airflow sensor harness. Disconnect the hose attached to the stock intake tube. Loosen both the clamps attached to the stock intake tube. Once everything's loose or disconnected, you can then remove the stock intake tube from the vehicle. Remove the two screws securing the stock intake box to the vehicle. Remove the harness from the back of the intake box. Lift the stock air box slightly to unseat the prongs from the grommets and then remove it from the vehicle. In order to remove the stock inlet, we're first going to remove this rivet and set it aside because we are going to reuse it later. Remove any clips that are securing the wire harness to the battery tray. There are a couple on the back of the battery tray as well. Next, you're going to remove these 4 screws that are securing the battery tray to the vehicle. Just make sure to set them aside because you will reuse them later. Once those are gone, you can then remove the battery tray and the front inlet from the vehicle. Now we want to remove this bracket, and in order to do that, we have to take these screws out. Remove the clips that are securing the AC line and the harness to the frame. Install the battery tray support bracket onto the frame. Line up the 3 holes, and then using the hardware that you had removed earlier, hand tighten those onto the outside. And using the provided hardware, hand tighten in the center. Reattach the AC line and harness clips. Go grab the stock battery tray because now we need to remove the stock U-bolt. And in order to do that, we're going to remove these 2 screws. In order to disconnect the inlet from the battery tray, you're just going to push down on these 2 tabs and it should just pop right off. Once that's disconnected, you can just pop out the U-bolt. Install the factory U-bolt into the S&B battery tray. You're going to want the long side to be on the straight side and the short side to be here with the dip. And then you'll just secure it down using a zip tie. Now you need to identify if you have 1 or 2 ground cables. The primary is going to be attached to the battery terminal, where the secondary is going to be over here, but you'll just leave that one alone. And then you're going to remove the screw attaching the primary to the frame. Once you remove the bolt, set it aside because you're going to use it later. Install the S&B battery tray onto the bracket. Secure it down with the provided hardware. Use the longest one in the front. Install the remaining 3, 2 on the bracket and the 1 on the fender. After you've tightened down the battery tray and you make sure it's secure, you should notice that there's plenty of room for the secondary ground. Now make sure that the screw nut and washer are secured down. Remove these 2 stock screws and set them aside because you're going to reuse them later. We reinstalled the primary ground back in its original location, except this time the tab is facing out and the wires are going this way. And we torqued down the stock bolt 106 pound-inches. When reinstalling the battery, install the negative terminal on the fender side and the positive on the engine side. Reinstall the factory hold-down bracket and the harness, and secure it down using the nuts we removed earlier. In order to reinstall the negative terminal onto the battery, you're going to have to take the tightening mechanism and flip it so the nut is facing up on the opposite side. Insert the bolt into the key. Take the open wedge, flat side to the terminal, the closed wedge, and secure it with the bolt. Before you reinstall the negative terminal back on the post, you can take a screwdriver and open this up to give you a little bit more room. Once you have this flipped, don't install it on the post yet, and then go over to the positive and take a wrench and unscrew the nut securing the secondary positive cable. Once you remove that nut, go ahead and set it aside because you're going to use it later. Once it's off, you can then disconnect the cables. Some vehicles have one and some will have two. This vehicle has two, and we're just going to extend them. If you only have one cable, the extension should look like this, and if you have two, you'll want to install it so this end is flat. Make sure to torque these down to 88 pound-inches and only use one extension per wire. You don't want to double up. Slide the heat shrink over the metal-to-metal connection. You'll want to try and center it so nothing's exposed, and then you can start to heat shrink. Double check to make sure there are no tears or metal showing, and then take the second piece of heat shrink and put it over the same area and do the same process. So this is how it should look when you're all done. If you do have the second cable, you can go ahead and repeat that process. After installing the two red heat shrinks, install the fabric heat shrink over the entire cable and extension. Once it's completely covered, you can go ahead and heat shrink it. So this is what it should look like after the heat shrink is done. If you have the second cable, repeat the process separately. Install the extensions onto the terminal and reinstall the nut you took off earlier, but you're going to leave it loose for now. Next, you're going to disconnect this clip securing the two harnesses and then cut this zip tie. Grab the tube support bracket and install the grommet. Loosely install the tube support bracket using the screws that you had removed earlier. Install the coupler and the clamps onto your new intake tube and tighten down only the back one. Install the tube onto the turbo and then align this prong with the grommet. And once it's aligned, you'll tighten down the screws to keep the bracket in place. Once those two bolts are secure, you can then remove the intake tube from the vehicle. Now you're going to install the filter onto the tube. You're just going to want to make sure that these location marks line up. Install the mass airflow sensor adapter and foam gasket onto your new intake tube. Now you can install the intake into the vehicle. And you'll want to make sure that the prong is fully seated in the grommet. Tighten down the hose clamp on the turbo and make sure that it's not touching this line. If the AC service port is hitting the tube, you can just bend it back a little bit. Install the mass airflow sensor extension and don't forget to engage both of the red locking tabs. Before reinstalling the positive cable, we're going to swap the tightening mechanism to the other side. Don't forget to reconnect the negative terminal on both batteries and the positive just on the passenger side. Use the provided zip ties to secure the mass airflow sensor extension harness to the ground cable to keep it away from any hot or moving engine components. Alright guys, so that's it. This intake kit has a 54.8% increase in airflow over stock while still maintaining a 99.19% efficiency rating. So if you have any other questions or you just want to know more, you can always check it out on our website or give us a call, and I'll see you next time.